welcome. Very, very glad to see you all. This is always a really exciting event. My name is Ann Field. I write about for-profit social enterprise and impact investing, mostly for Forbes.com as a contributor. My blog there is called Not Only for Profit. And we have 5 finalists for what is, I think, the 7th Grunin Prize. Every year, the finalists are just amazing in terms of their ingenuity. And the same thing is true this year. And I always like to add that I think one of the themes is that the legal talent and ingenuity, it's kind of the unsung heroes of impact, would not exist without it, which is the main reason why this event is so important. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each of our finalists. Each person's going to describe their initiative. Then we'll ask a few questions of each other. If there's time, then, perhaps we can take a question or two from the audience. So that said, we're just going to start here, going down the line. If you can introduce yourself and then tell us about your project.
Sure, thank you. My name is Kevan Rastegar. Our project is the Flexible Company in Austria. Would you like us to do the whole thing or do a quick round of intros?
No, just do the whole thing.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, I'll do the whole thing. All right, so we created a new legal entity type in Austria. And if you think about impact investing and social entrepreneurship, the way we think about that in the US is a little bit from the perspective of putting more impact into the investing and putting a little more social into the entrepreneurship. But there's other areas in the world where you have to do that, sort of do the inverse, which is put some investing to start with and some entrepreneurship as well to create, if you will, the hardware for the software applications of impact investing and social entrepreneurship. So we were sort of many jurisdictions in the EU, but in particular the German-speaking ones, and in particular Austria, have very old, archaic systems. Our last entity was from 1906, a time and age where you couldn't really get divorced. Criminal offense to do so, and many other basic human rights and rights of property underdeveloped. And so then it's no surprise that many of the things that we take for granted in other developed parts of the world weren't quite that easy to achieve, starting with, for instance, having employees participate in the company in a region where you have sort of very binary models on what your role in a company is. You're either an owner, you're a creditor, or an employee, and you must not cross party lines. So we set out to change a number of those things. My personal story was I just moved back to Austria from the US, and I just couldn't believe all the things that you couldn't do. You couldn't do a convertible note. You couldn't do any sort of share classes. When you transferred shares, you had to have a notary public read the whole document to you and pay thousands and thousands of euros. So lots of red tape and bureaucracy, essentially stifling entrepreneurship, including social entrepreneurship. And what got me started was an enterprise that we wanted to set up for the inclusion of the mentally disabled in journalism. And our company's registry simply said, sorry, no, that's not a thing here. We don't recognize that. We have for-profit or tax-exempt non-for-profit. Start again. And so then we set out to ask the powers that be who's in charge and who came up with those rules, and embarked on something like a 6 to 8 year lobbying process, which culminated in a working group in 2020 with the Ministry of Justice, some 30 to 40 experts. I was a member of that group, co-appointed essentially as a nonpartisan, simply like, you could say an American foreign element in the Austrian system, just looking to stir up trouble. And our position was very simple. Our position was, we'll just benchmark the world. We'll figure out what people do in most jurisdictions, and then we'll present that and say that is the standard these days. And initially, our mics were muted. Like, imagine this mic going off saying, that's enough. Thank you for your contribution. But they, ultimately we got our mics turned back on and they had to listen to us. Fast forward a couple of years, there was daily high resolution lobbying. And part of the story here is there's all kinds of different forms of political corruption. Ours took the shape of the legal profession being the bad guys, right? We, the lawyers, looking to make a profit on all kinds of bureaucracy. So the notary public's making billions on deeds. So you want to transfer shares, you can't just do that. You have got to pay somebody to read the document to you. But then also the judges and the court clerks having strong control over the economy at large, because anything you want to do, you have to file an application with the commercial registry and they will approve or not based on how much they like what you're doing. Including the bar of the attorneys. And so think of me as a traitor to our profession, saying, hey, hang on, that might not be the right thing to do. And before we set out to affect global change and apply all these amazing new concepts that we have, let's maybe start at our own doorstep and get rid of some of that really unjust and simply just wrong and immoral bureaucracy. And so we tried to do that. And we obviously didn't get 100% done of what we tried to do. Let's say we achieved 15 to 20%, but we got a new legal entity. We got some share classes. We got a reduction on the bureaucracy on the transfer of the deeds and on capital raises. We built a whole employee participation program. We built separate tax rules, a separate statute, based on the benchmarking of our neighboring countries in the EU, and with a lot of effort and with hundreds and hundreds of people working long hours for many years, we pushed it through Parliament, including a last-ditch effort to time limit the statutes, done by the chairman of our Judiciary Committee in Parliament, whose son-in-law is a notary public, and who wanted to put a timestamp on it at the very last second, lest nobody vote on it. And I say these things publicly here. That's kind of the point, is to not be afraid and not sort of be worried about offending some powers that be and some special interests, but simply saying what we lawyers know is the substantively correct outcome based on our expertise, and then step by step moving forward. And so that's the flexible company that we present to you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Agostina Coniglio. I'm a co-founder of Kaidos, which is a consultancy firm / impact law firm with a 3-dimensional approach. We do consultancy services, training and education, and impact law advisory. Part of our purpose is to empower lawyers to become agents of change or change makers. And that's very related to this initiative we presented, which is the International Executive Program on Impact Law for Latin America, which intends to address this need. We identified with the amount of students we have enrolled in the program, which we had the second edition last year. This need was manifested by students of accessing this impact law field knowledge. But the need behind the need, I think, it's lawyers trying to become partners of their clients, trying to become a part of these impactful solutions. They do want to do it, but probably they don't know how to, or they don't know how they can be a part of it. So this program, it's an introduction course of 6 classes, which is taught at the Universidad Austral of Buenos Aires, Argentina, since 2022. It's composed of 6 classes, and it intends to reconvert legal education in Latin America, which is often approached in a theoretical-based manner. So we tried to promote a new way of educating and training lawyers on these fields, but not only in terms of content, because this is very dynamic, and as we speak, it is developing in terms of regulation, but also in terms of standards. But we intend them to develop software skills and offer them tools to become these agents of change. We say it's a first of its kind in Latin America because we intend to move forward from this theory-based approach into a more holistic approach in education, because we believe in the transformative power of education. And we believe if we have more lawyers trained on these topics, then we will have more deals and more impact structures that have the desired effect. So for being an introduction course, this course covered some of the topics of the impact law. It is not exhaustive, but the academic director had chosen which of the main topics were important to start training and educating Latin American lawyers. And we see and we say this is a need, but we want to encourage this and take it like as an opportunity, because we have a lot of nationalities of Latin America represented in the course. That the course was taught virtually and it was in Spanish, so we leverage on that characteristic of our region. We have students from Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, Peru, Argentina, so it was pretty extensive, but I think also we had a lot of lawyers coming from different work fields and from different ages. So I think we got a pretty diverse environment that I think that also have enriching the debates, because that was what we were aiming to, that they develop softer skills in order to become actively involved in these impactful solutions of the design, and not only having conversation with their peers, but also with other disciplines. So one of our key features of the program is we have an international faculty. So we try to promote this access to these impact law topics of professionals that are practicing law, more developed jurisdictions, most of them of the global north. So we said we have democratized that knowledge. But that knowledge not in terms only of content, but also in sharing experience, sharing lessons, and share visions. And having developed such a diverse environment from the student body, we think we had also enriched the visions of the faculty, especially those from the global north. So I think it was a win-win relationship we have managed to reach. And we also had non-legal professionals as part of the faculty body. So this encouraged more the importance of talking to other professionals, other disciplines, in order to provide more holistic and integral solutions that I think they are needed on these fields. Also, we say the program was thought out as it was intended to be taught to students, in terms of we leverage on our communities or on our networks, on our knowledge, in order to provide this program. So we had members of our communities, of our networks coming together and being part of the faculty in order to be a part of that. And it was also this thought or idea to build small communities inside these 6 encounters, but also so these communities integrate with already existing ones. I think we had a long way to go in terms of legal practice and legal education in Latin America, but I think this kind of conferences also helps to share our vision and to share our ideas and to share what it worked and what it didn't work. And also I understand that the different regions have different characteristics, but I think that is a positive way, and we have to take this as an opportunity in order to provide and be part of more impactful deals or legal solutions. In terms of the beneficiaries, we have a diversity of nationalities, as I mentioned, but I think one of my personal key features was that we had identified 2 groups of lawyers, one group being more senior lawyers with a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge and background that are trying to repurpose their careers. And I think there's another group of more younger lawyers who are very convinced and are very aware of what is happening, and they want to be part of this solution, but they don't still acknowledge their profession, their legal profession, as a means to do that. So I think this program has given them the opportunity to repurpose their careers for senior lawyers and for younger lawyers to know this world because it's not easy to be found, but I think it's a wonderful world. And also, we have listened to our beneficiaries, which are our students, which are Latin American lawyers. And from the 2022 edition, we carry out a satisfaction survey where students said, okay, this is perfect, but we still need more practical approach. So we heard them, and we added one more class in the 2023 edition, which was a practical workshop, and we took the case we developed at class 3, which was a ESG due diligence, and then we did a second part of it as a practical workshop and role play, and that was very fun because students were really engaged to that. And of course, this practical outlook we tried to do we were trying to also to become this challenge of virtuality to promote and engage with students, which is not easy. And I'm really happy because I know we have integrated this legal community we built into others. I know there's one of our students here today, so I'm really happy about that, to be a bridge between these communities and to keep on integrating. And we wanted also to bring their voices here, so I brought one of our testimonies. It's just one sentence, but I really like to read it because one of our colleagues mentioned that in these conferences we do not get to speak to the beneficiaries or to listen to them, and they are the ones who are saying this worked, this didn't work, we need this and we need that. So one of our students wrote in this satisfaction survey, it is a program that offers a different approach to the legal profession, unique in its kind and with down-to-earth content. It invites a new way of practicing law. And one of the things also we want to highlight with this program is it's just a first approach. We have plans for the future, and I'm really happy to share them with you afterwards. But I think this program starts to highlight the importance of having education as a common agenda for academia, legal practitioners, non-legal professionals, and we believe in the power of education as a transformative tool to have more deals, to develop the market, to be able to design these legal impactful solutions, but at the same time for they to have the desired effect. And I think it's not only important to have this common agenda, but also to see it as a priority for having more lawyers to be trained on these topics, especially those from the Global South. So we have plans for the future, and we want to see this as a priority because, again, we believe in the power of education, and we don't want to leave for tomorrow what we can do today. So that's part of our initiative. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Is this working? Yes. Hi, my name is Turgut Can Korel. I'm a senior counsel at IFC, International Finance Corporation, based in Singapore. International Finance Corporation, as many of you know, is a member of the World Bank Group and the largest global development institution focused exclusively on the private sector in developing countries. The initiative that I'd like to talk about is a private equity fund investment, which IFC made alongside with other investors late last year. The name of the fund is CSEF2. CSEF stands for Southeast Asia Clean Energy Fund. And before I start going into the details of what the fund is and how it works, I wanted to tie it to two ideas that I heard from the panels that I attended earlier in the day. The first big idea I heard is that collaboration among different pockets of impact capital is an important idea. And I think our initiative establishes that type of cooperation, which which I will talk about. The second big idea I heard is that the climate crisis and climate transition is not something that we can tackle first without that type of collaboration. And secondly, certainly not by doing business as usual. So we need to think innovatively. We need to start thinking about putting together different structures and ways to approach the issue. So that's how I bring the project into what I've heard so far at the conference. So what was it that this project was trying to solve? Essentially, the market in Southeast Asia for climate transition projects is structured in a way such that developers, very early stage developers of these projects are struggling to find equity capital to get them from the very early phase, which is the riskiest phase of a project development, to a later stage where they can actually prove their concept and attract follow-on capital so that they can go ahead and construct their business or their project and be successful. And the main reason for that gap in capital availability is that it's risky. And it's risky because it's early stage. So irrespective of the sector you're talking about, it's always risky to invest in a project that hasn't done its feasibility studies, right? But it's also risky because we're talking about climate transition projects, which is still a pretty new area when it comes to the technology aspects and the regulatory aspects. So traditional commercial capital, at least in that region of the world, doesn't really have the appetite to take that risk. Now, some commercial capital is taking the risk, part of that risk, on a portfolio basis. So what do I mean by that? So there are platforms that will invest in a collection of projects, but some of these projects will carry the high risk characteristics of being early stage, while others will actually be at the later, less risky phase of operations. And so together as a whole, the platform itself will not be as risky. So that's when commercial capital can come in. But what this fund is trying to do is to focus exclusively on the riskiest, earliest stage of development for climate transition projects where there just wasn't capital. So that's the big problem. And how did the fund and its investors address this issue? First of all, it was by creating a private equity fund as opposed to another structure. And the private equity fund does a few things. Number one, it creates a legal platform where these different pockets of impact capital, which I mentioned at the beginning, can come in together and they can work together. And the second thing it does is that it's managed by a fund manager, right? And that's how these funds work. And the fund manager, in this case, is a group of individuals who used to be project developers themselves. So they understand the risks, the early stage risks, from a business angle, from a technical angle. So they're the right people to kind of hold the hands of these early stage developers. And in addition to giving them capital, which is coming from us investors, they can also help them on an additional basis, qualitatively. So in order to, so the first, was to select the fund, private equity fund as the vehicle. And the second thing, which was, the more innovative aspect, was to think about how to structure the fund so that private capital can be crowded in. Because, as I said, commercial capital doesn't have the risk appetite for this asset class. And in fact, CCEF, this fund, this is CCEF 2, remember? CCEF had a predecessor fund called CCEF 1. It was funded exclusively by philanthropic capital because of the risky nature. And it just didn't achieve the kind of scale that's needed to address the issue. And therefore, the philanthropic investors in Fund 1, they decided that for Fund 2, we're going to create a dual tranche structure where the philanthropic capital will take a junior tranche, a first loss junior tranche, in order to crowd in commercial capital. And so that's where our organization, IFC, came in alongside other development finance institutions. And we invested in that second tranche, essentially being crowded into this investment. Now, the way, so once putting together these pools of capital, the way the fund will work is that it will identify these early stage projects, and it will, initially, it will write these very small tickets, maybe as low as even $500,000 to get them off the ground. After writing those tickets, they will work with them. This is the kind of non-financial additionality that I was talking about earlier. They will work with them to hone their business plan, to give them kind of ecosystem access, and give them, other connections in the market, and talk about technology, help them on ESG aspects, and then see how they progress. And if they're progressing well, these are the so-called winners, then the fund will write a much bigger ticket to those winners. Say, for the sake of example, say 10 million, so like even 10 or 20 times larger amount than the first ticket. And so this is a powerful way to do it, because it kind of tracks the disbursements by milestone and based on success of progress, and the fund manager is helping with all of this. So that's how it works. And I think just a couple of more minutes on whether this model is something that is scalable and impactful. Obviously, the sector is impactful. It's climate transition. But the philanthropic investor vehicle, ACP, which stands for Allied Climate Partners, which essentially pioneered this structure, they estimated that every dollar that the fund will spend on one of these project companies will be multiplied to $14 of additional capital contributed to that company if it is successful. And how is that done? So essentially, one way in which it will be done is if the project gets to a successful operations and it gets de-risked. At that point, there will be additional capital, even debt capital, at a lower cost of funding that will flow into these companies or projects ideally. So 14x is the estimated kind of scale impact. And the larger idea of scale is that if this proof of concept works for CCEF2, then first of all, CCEF itself, if it goes on to raise funds 3, 4, 5, 6, it can actually do so perhaps without even that junior capital even needed, or with a thinner slice of junior capital, and can actually crowd in true commercial money as well. So that's how it could be scaled by CCEF. And of course, it could also be replicated by other fund managers in other regions of the world, where in markets where the same characteristics apply, and there's that gap between the supply and demand for capital when it comes to early phase client transition projects. So let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fernanda Mieres. I'm from Argentina. I'm a partner at Estudio Beccaro Varela, which is one of the largest law firms in Argentina. I'm the head of the corporate M&A and also co-lead the ESG area. And together with my colleague, Luciana Eneri, which is sitting in the audience, that is the head of capital markets, we have developed this project, which is the issuance of a social bond allowing the B Corp for the very first time to access to capital markets in order to get financing. This company is called Traza Argentina, and it is involved in financial inclusion, giving access to all financial advices and projects to vulnerable neighborhoods. And the innovative of this is because Traza is a middle-sized company, and in order to allow them to get access to the capital markets, we have worked together with the regulators in order to reduce the requirements in order for the companies to access the capital markets. And this we could have done it because we have been working with the regulators since last year, where we also counseled one of the first NGOs to access to capital market, which also works in financial inclusion. And because of that work that we have been doing with Sumatoria, which is one of these leading cases of an NGO going for the very first time to the capital market, we could also convince and also work with the regulators in order to allow these kind of issuances also for middle-sized corporations. Our proximity to the B Corps come because actually myself, I am one of the founders of Sistema B in Argentina. We brought all the movement right now, and actually have been appointed as the president of the organization. And we have been working together with all the network of B Corps in Argentina. And maybe, as you know, the capital markets in Argentina is not so well developed right now because of all the financial problems and all the situation that's going on in Argentina right now. And these kind of projects allowed the capital markets to change the view and to see that they have an opportunity to use the funds that they obtain for the investors for doing good. So when we spoke with Traza for the very first time, saying that they could use this possibility of accessing the capital market as a way of financing their activities, they said, "Oh, you are crazy." And we said, "No, trust on us, because we as lawyers have like a very, a very powerful tool, which is the law. And also we have this, as corporate lawyers, we have a relationship with the different players that we need for these kind of issuances. We have a very good relationship with the banks. We had a very good relationship with the regulators, with the guarantors, that in this case was the same bank, and the underwriter. And we also had the very good relationship with the third party verifier, that we need this in this kind of social issuances, a third party to say that these funds will be used for the purpose of a social purpose in this case. So the project for Traza was the installation of ATMs in the vulnerable neighborhoods. You know that in Argentina, we have more than 5,000 neighborhoods. We have 1,500 people under the line of poverty. So companies as Traza, that they are looking at these kind of people in order to give them the benefits and to include them through the financial system, it's a very good purpose to have. And we wanted to support that. And Traza needed that financing in order to install these ATMs, and also some mobile financial units where they used to collect some payments, such as cell phones or internet services. Before Traza doing this in these sort of poor neighborhoods, people have to travel like almost like 1 hour in order to go access and get the money or cash from other ATMs. And then they had to travel all back again to other poor neighborhoods with all the risks that constrain, because, and also they spent the money, because they didn't want to go back home with all the cash in their hands. So they spent the money in other shoppings and locals around those ATMs. And now the installation of the ATMs within the poor neighborhoods, it allows the people to just spend the money in the local, in the local shops that they have around. So an indirect benefit that Traza is doing, not only for the vulnerable people, it's only for all the neighborhood, because everybody is progressing because of this installation of these ATMs. So we worked with the banks, we worked with the regulation, and I think that the innovative thing of this project is that we could be the councils of all the parties here, and brought them the comfort and the trust that as we have been here and we understood the language of everybody, we could put them together and build this kind of project. Actually, this issuance was also based on ICMA standards, and that was a very good for the capital markets. And what we have been seeing, because we counsel also Sumatoria, as I tell you, these NGOs in the past years, is that more banks are interested and they want to be part of this. Actually, we are going now counseling TRASA for the second round of a second issue for more higher amounts, and they will be installing more and more ATMs and financial units within these poor neighborhoods. And another thing to share with you that we got surprised when we did this, TRASA went and asked for a certain amount of money in the capital markets, but at the time they issued this social bond, they got oversubscriptions 5 times the amount they were looking for. And that was very surprising for us because we saw that a great interest for the investors to find these kind of instruments in order for them to finance. And also for TRASA was a benefit because it could lower the interest rate when repaying these bonds back. So for us, it was very successful to see that we could have the idea of this project, talk to the regulator, convince them that this was for good in order to lower the requirements for small and middle-sized companies to access the capital markets. We found that it was very good for the Argentinian capital markets to be involved in this kind of projects because the money in the end was destined for the most vulnerable people that in the end got benefit from this. For TRASA, because it's a B Corp with its main purpose, because they are not only doing this for good, they are gaining money for this and for their shareholders, but by doing good and transforming a way of including people to the financial system. And I think that for us, and we say this with Luciana, it was like very comfortable to see that we could use the powerful of the law in order to transform the lives for many people. So this project also gave us the opportunity that other B Corps are now working with us in order to issue other social bonds, green bonds, sustainable bonds. They feel comfortable with us, and all the banks now, they want to be there. They want to finance these kinds. So we have changed all the environment of this. So we feel very proud to have the opportunity. And we also feel very proud to have the opportunity to share this with you because we believe that this is a project that could be scalable and could be used in any country, in any Latin American country or any other country in the world, because all the project is there. It could be easily used. All the sources are available, and we will be very glad to share all what we have done with all the different parties. And we also are very grateful for the Grunin Center to allow us all of these projects to be shared with you and make them known. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Charlie Sweet. I'm a partner in Morgan Lewis's Structured Transactions Practice Group. I'm the co-author of a treatise called Offerings of Asset-Backed Securities. So as you can gather, impact investing is not in my normal toolkit. Exactly. And I'm really honored to be sitting up here with this group of panelists and the projects. It's just incredible what folks have done. Personally, what I did, along with my colleague Jerry Parker, who's out in the audience, led the Morgan Lewis team that worked on the initial offering of cut carbon notes, along with a team from Calvert Impact's in-house legal department, led by Emily and Liu, who's in the audience too, I believe, and Elise Young. And the core of the cut carbon note program is CPACE loans, commercial property assessed clean energy loans. And it's the very simplest form. A pool of these loans provides the cash flows to make payments on the cut carbon notes that we've issued. What is CPACE? I'm probably telling you what you already know, but it's a tax-advantaged financing instrument created by legislation. The purpose, to allow commercial building owners to borrow low-cost, long-term funds for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other types of sustainable projects. And then they make their repayments not directly like on a loan, but through an assessment on their property tax bill. And as you can imagine, greenhouse gas emissions related to commercial buildings make a huge contribution to the climate crisis. And we have a commercial construction market in the U.S. Is well over $100 billion industry. So if we could make C-PACE financing available to a market of that size, that has the potential for an immense impact on energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, all of which sounds great, right? But where do we get the money to fund C-PACE loans from? Well, lenders can use their balance sheet, which is clearly, that's pretty expensive and inefficient. It can come and has come from institutional lenders under typical warehouse financing facilities. And Calvert, our client, facilitated C-PACE financings in that way for many years, using warehouse-type financings. But in the end, funds are limited, funds are temporary, and there's nowhere near the capacity needed to make a real sizable impact. So what Calvert did was they started this project by identifying a need for efficient, scalable, replicable, permanent C-PACE takeout financing. And then they focused in on securitization, which is where I come in, because it has two main structural characteristics that permit the type of financing they were looking for. First of all, the pool assets, in this case the C-PACE loans, are put into a bankruptcy remote special purpose vehicle, and that eliminates the credit risk of the originator or the seller from the assets. It allows a rating on the bonds to depend almost entirely on the projected cash flow from the assets and ignore the credit quality of the originator or seller. And second, we use what's called a waterfall to tranche our bonds into multiple classes at varying levels of seniority, which allows the more senior classes to, on having a higher priority to the cash flows, to get a higher credit rating, to be of a higher credit quality with the support of those lower rated bonds. There had been C-PACE securitizations before Cut Carbon, but only a few, and they were really more typical ABS offerings, the type I normally work on, which are made to large institutional investors. Calvert looked at this, and it identified a number of issues that it wanted to solve before it started its own C-PACE securitization program. First, an efficient permanent takeout financing mechanism, because they wanted to encourage growth in the C-PACE market and improve sustainability. Second, they wanted to do something which is unusual in my space. They wanted to democratize the bonds by making them available to a wide range of investors, including retail investors. Third, they wanted to eliminate as many typical securitization costs and hurdles and uncertainties as they could, including the need to rely on a typical institutional underwriter. And finally, they wanted it to be scalable, replicable, serve as a proof of concept to encourage other issuers to take the same path. So what we landed on was a structure that blends traditional securitization techniques with what I think of as groundbreaking structural features and compliance strategies, but they may be familiar to some of the rest of you because they're used in other contexts. What we did was we pulled them together, repurposed them, tweaked them, and used them in different ways. And in the end, we have an asset-backed, investment-grade rated fixed income product that's available to retail investors as well as institutions. So we think a huge opportunity to reduce the U.S. carbon footprint by encouraging property owners to use greener building features. We think of the innovations, at least I do, in this project as twofold. First, we have a 501c3 tax-exempt entity as the issuer. Very unusual in my marketplace. There were some 501c3 issuers decades ago in the student loan area, but they have really gone by the wayside. So this was new, and it was used for a different purpose. This allowed the notes to be sold to public retail investors, just like other nonprofit securities offerings. And to be able to do that, we had to comply with the Dodd-Frank credit risk retention rules, which require sponsors of securitizations to retain a 5% credit risk retention piece. And to do that, we repurposed the recoverable grant concept and used that as the ABS interest that complies with the Dodd-Frank credit risk retention rules. Proceeds from the notes, C-PACE financing all types of commercial buildings, so covers energy efficiency improvements like solar, smart building controls, more efficient heating and cooling, windows and lighting. And we have these C-PACE receivables that are underwritten and originated by Pace Equity, LLC, which is Calvert's financing partner, which also provides engineering reviews and design assistance geared towards maximizing the impact of the finance sustainability features. When the Assets are originated, they're financed through a typical warehouse facility, the type I talked about earlier. But when that pool gets big enough to support an offering, the warehouse financing vehicle sells them to our 501c3 issuer, which then securitizes them. And again, using the cash flows from borrower payments on the C-PACE loans to pay principal interest to investors. PACE Equity stays involved. They monitor the efficiency footprints of the buildings financed by the assets, tracks their carbon footprints, and they provide reporting to note holders regularly on impact metrics, including green bond principle alignment, impact principles, and other industry standards. And also, there's another feature built in because the program rewards elevated efficiency performance with a tiered C-PACE loan pricing structure. So a building that gets tier 1 of PACE Equity's low carbon design specification requirements gets a 50 bips discount. Buildings that achieve tier 2 get a full 100 basis point discount. So we had the initial offering. There was an initial pool of C-PACE assets included 12 projects in 6 states. And even this just small initial offering, we're expecting to result in 82,000 metric tons of carbon savings, $20 million of energy expenditure savings, 120 million kilowatt hours of electric savings, 550 million kBTUs of heat savings, 38 million gallons of water savings, solar generation capacity installed approximately 1160 kilowatt peak hour output, and annual solar production of approximately 970 megawatt hours. So you can imagine if we scale this thing to its full $400 million facility size, these numbers could increase dramatically and really provide efficient financing for hundreds of green commercial projects. I mentioned prior C-PACE investment opportunities have been limited and available to large institutional investors. Because of our novel 501c3 structure, Calbart was able to place the initial $30 million worth of securities with a lot of different types of investors, millennials investing through their retirement accounts, individual clients at financial advisory funds, and institutional green bond buyers. So hopefully the success of this program is going to educate and encourage those folks to consider other impact investment opportunities in the future. And maybe more importantly, we think the structure we devised can be duplicated and scaled by other C-PACE lenders, even for other types of impact projects. For that example, I think Calbart is thinking about using the same structure to finance small business loans. We talked about this for 3 years before we did the initial offering. We talked about a lot of different legal structures. This was not a simple task. And if you know anything about securitization, you know, when I'm running a deal, I'm basically keeping the trains running. I know about a lot, but I don't know everything. We had contributions from federal securities law experts, tax-exempt org experts, bankruptcy experts, commercial experts, ERISA, finance, investment management. And finally, we had to have blue sky help because unlike a typical ABS offering, which relies on an institutional exemption, while we got simpler blue sky treatments, our friends at Warner Norcross and Judd helped us to navigate that, which was not an easy process either. So in the end, we think the Cut Carbon Note program is innovative. We think it's powerful. We think it's going to help combat climate change. We think it's going to encourage greener commercial construction and hopefully open a new impact investing market to retail investors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So usually I would throw a question or two out to everyone, but we have 5 precious minutes, and I thought maybe we could take questions from people in the audience. And if you have a question, just come on up to the mic over there. No?
No pressure.
Okay. Okay. Then I can go back to my original plan. I'm really curious to know from all of you, or as many of you as we can get to, what were the biggest challenges you faced in making your project happen? And then, this might be a challenge that's just very specific to the project that you worked on, or it could be something that's more generally a part of working with an impact situation. So who would like to start? Okay, we'll start with you.
I mean, the retail component of our program. I mean, ABS, RMBS generally, institutional products made for institutions that are able to model and look at the structural features. So in addition to considering sort of the federal and state securities law implications, we had to create disclosures that were both complete, but also appropriate for retail investors. So I think that was the hardest thing for us.
Interesting. Okay.
And if I have to choose, we had many challenges, but one of the challenges, yes, in Argentina we have many, but one of the challenges that we faced is that in order to convince the B Corps, middle-sized companies that the capital market is an alternative for their financing, as opposed to go to the traditional way of financing, to asking for loans for the bank. They really now trust on us, and they saw that they have sort of indirect benefits. Right now, I told our judging panel yesterday that right now the CEO of Traza, this B Corp, is like a rock star in Argentina right now. He's, he goes to every panel. They have just installed the last financial mobile unit within these vulnerable neighborhoods, and the mayor of the city was there. So he comes out in the media and he's winning a lot of awards because of this project. So I believe that this, yes, to convince, common people, the largest companies, that they can access to the capital market and use the capital markets funds for good.
So on our side, the technical challenge we had is that climate transition is not named in the U.S. tax code as a charitable purpose, which would allow, setting up a 501c3 in order to bring in the philanthropic capital into the structure. But our friends at Morgan Lewis, Tomer Imbar and team,
Who were on our deal as well, by the way.
yes, Tomar's on two finalist teams. So they actually managed to convince the IRS that climate change, in fact, is a charitable purpose by framing it in the context of the global south, the so-called global south, and that while it's a global problem, the developing countries are the ones that carry disproportionate burden of climate change. And then a lot of examples of how that can happen through natural disasters, through the reliance of the economy on agriculture, etc. And that worked with IRS. So that was, it was a needed ingredient in order to make this dual tranche work. So on the technical side. And I think just one final sentence is that the bigger idea, it's not maybe a challenge, it's a question, but the bigger question is, how to scale this. And the problem is a global problem. It's not limited to Southeast Asia. And there, I'm glad to say that the pockets of impact capital that were involved in this deal, as they were doing this deal, at the same time, they were talking on potential ways to scale it and replicate it in other regions. And so those conversations are ongoing, which is great. Thank you.
Well, I think that ironically, one of our advantages that was that most of the countries in Latin America speak in Spanish was also a challenge, because most of the material is in English. So we have struggling with this because we didn't have like a lot of material to offer in Spanish. So all of the students could access, because of course, some of the students can read and speak in English, but that was a big challenge. But we are trying to convert it to our new goal, to have more material, not only in Spanish, because it's just an example, because half of our population in Latin America speaks Portuguese. And if we want to scale this and replicate, of course, we will need this content and this shared experience and knowledge in all languages, not only in English or Spanish. So, well, that was a big challenge, but it's our new goal also for the future. I have to say that.
So the short version is keeping the mic on was the biggest challenge. I would say the thing that I learned was the biggest challenge was the keeping the faith, in the sense that when you're working on legislation, it's definitely outside of your control. It's way bigger than any sum of people working on it. the majorities are fleeting, the political landscape is fleeting. And if you have something that's technically driven and requires multiple years of work, it's also about standing at the outset and saying, we all want to invest our time not knowing what the outcome is, and the risk of failure is incredibly high. And it's also not substantive failure or just failure. It could be any number of random things where this, among so many other projects, just ultimately doesn't get done. And so keeping the faith and keeping the rhythm, I would say was for most people involved the personal challenge, but it's all about the mic.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. And thanks to you all for coming. And hope to see you next year.